Over the years, I've pretty much tested every single way you could ever think of on how to run a really good conversation. And out of all the ways that I found and tested, there were two realizations that I had that made the biggest and the most profound impact to when it came to creating really deep emotional connections. The first one was I realized that people really don't care about the what of things anywhere near as much as they care about the why of things, okay? And I'll explain what that means in a second. But the second one was that I learned that people really don't care about facts anywhere near as much as they appreciate the story behind the facts. So what does that mean? The first one, it meant that if I told you I went to Prague and I really didn't like it, that's probably going to be pretty interesting to you, okay? Especially if you've never been to Prague and you want to go to Prague. But you may notice that really what caught your attention was the curiosity of why. Okay, why did I not like Prague? So if I told you now that I really didn't like Prague because I felt that when I went there, it was just a city that did not have a lot to offer, that I went there to meet a whole bunch of pretty European women and it was the worst man-to-woman ratio I've ever seen in my entire life and throughout all of my travels, that I hate smoking and yet everyone smoked inside the club. And I went to this one club that was 5 stories and I felt by the time I walked out of it, I lost 5 years of my life from all the smoke that I inhaled. And that what made it even worse was that everyone built it up so highly that I went there for my birthday, which set my expectations even higher than it would have normally been. And therefore I felt even more let down. That is way more interesting. And it's because it explains why. And that why bonds us together. Okay, we can relate on being disappointed. We can relate on having high expectations and having them not fulfilled. And you probably noticed that there was quite a bit of a story in there, and that kind of explains the second point, right? People get attached to stories because we get attached to other people's experiences, and stories explain experiences. So if you thought that was pretty interesting, you're going to be pretty happy to know that there's an even more interesting way to tell that information, and it comes with a format, okay? And you can follow that format with each and every single time you share a story, okay? And it's literally going to suck her into your world and make her hang off your every single word. So this is pretty much how it goes. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay, which is obvious, but what's less obvious is there's a setting, a conflict, and a resolution. So a setting is the most basic part of the story that you're going to use to build off of everything, okay? And then in this case, it would be that my setting was Prague, or that I spent my birthday in Prague. The conflict was everything that happened from there, and it's going to be the fact that I really hated it and all the reasons for why I hated it. Then there's going to be the resolution, which is sort of going to recap everything. And if you want to make it even more powerful, you're going to add a lesson to it, okay? A lesson that you learn from that experience. So in my Prague situation, if I wanted to tell it as a story, I'd start with the setting being, so I was in Prague for my 23rd birthday and I hated it, okay? That was the setting. The conflict is, I remember that I wanted to meet some really pretty European women and it was 90% guys, and so it was really, really bad. But what made it worse were things like I went to this 5-story club that everyone said was amazing, and not only was it only filled with guys, even though it was a totally straight club, but everyone was smoking inside. And so when I went in there, I felt like by the time I walked out, I must have shaved 5 years off my life. It was really horrible. Then that would be the conflict, right? And the resolution would be, and the crazy thing is a lot of people say that Prague's a great city, and who knows in actuality, but there's absolutely no way I'm ever going back. Okay, and if you were to leave it with a lesson, you'd say something like, but that experience really taught me that life is about different experiences, and everyone, something that I like, the next person could hate, and it could be the other way around. And it really is the truth that you need to go out and find out what's important to you and what's valuable to you, because what's valuable to you is not going to be what's valuable to the next person. And you got to take chances and just go see what your life really will be like what's possible. And that applies to business, that applies to relationships, that applies to everything. I'm sure you can realize that's a pretty deep story to tell, and that it really instantly bonds myself and the girl together instantly, right? And if you tell her the same story, it will bond you and her together too, right? Obviously, don't tell my story, But I'm also sure you could probably feel that emotional impact as you're watching this through your own computer screen. It's very, very powerful. Now, here's another story that I typically tell a girl within the first few minutes of meeting her on my date. I'd meet her in my neighborhood, which was Chelsea. So I'd start with the setting. I love living here in Chelsea. And then I'd move into the conflict and I'd say, I remember when I was a kid, I used to walk around and I'd see all these buildings. I'd see they're huge. I'd see all these apartments and know how expensive they were. And I would be in complete awe and think, who the heck lives here? How amazing is that? I would see it and be so fascinated. And I remember I'd come back periodically to the city. I'd see this neighborhood. I'd see all the buildings when I came back to hang out with my friends. And in the meantime, I was working really hard. I was working at school. I was working at my job. And it's so crazy to think that out of all the times I've wondered that and all the times I came here, after all these years, now I live here, right? And that's moving into the conclusion, right? We already even started leading into it, and we'd say, and that's the crazy thing. Like, I never thought I would live here. It seemed like a dream. And now you'd move into the lesson you learned, right? This is the lesson that's really going to bond it all even more deeply. Okay, you guys are going to be cemented together with this deep emotional connection. You're going to say, and it's so surreal, but it really did teach me a lesson that if you want something bad enough, you can't wait for it to happen. You have to go get it. Okay, it's not going to happen on its own. As much as everyone likes to think those who have it probably just have it, and maybe, you know, they got it from their parents or something, and maybe for a lot of people that's true, but for those of us who don't have it and weren't raised with it, you have to go get it. You don't have a choice. You owe it to yourself. And now you realize, like, that story is so powerful when I tell it, and they literally lose it and become so sucked into who I am and who my character is. And you need to realize that you could do it too. So what you got to do is you got to think about all the amazing stories that you could share, all the deep experiences that you've had, and then start sharing them with the same story format that I just gave you, okay? So maybe you were a top student in school and you did so well and everyone looked up to you, and you finally graduated, but then you couldn't find a job, right? And which led you to start growing your own business. And that taught you, right, moving into the lesson, that if you wanted to do something that will achieve a result that almost no one ever gets, you got to start doing things that no one else is doing. Or maybe your friend was in a really bad relationship with a woman who mistreated him and treated him like total crap. And maybe it taught you that you never want to date a girl that's ever going to mistreat you. Tell her that story and, you know, start delving into the deep things that matter to you and the lessons you've learned and what led you to learn them. And those stories are really going to deepen the connection in ways I've never found anything else ever could. But the key really is to leave a lesson at the end of it, because otherwise they won't hit nearly as well. All right. Now, also, what you want to realize is you're not necessarily going to tell these stories in the middle of nowhere, although a lot of times you can, especially as you get really experienced in telling stories and having your conversations. Typically, the way you're going to do it is by somebody making a comment, and then you're going to use that comment to start leading into a story. Okay, so for example, if you made a comment about, or maybe she made a comment about how she's new to your city, you could start jumping into stories about what it's like to be there, right? Start telling your stories about your experience being in a new city for the very first time. Or you can start telling her about how you always wanted to move to a new city and start a completely new life with new friends, a new job, with no one that you know from before, and just start all over, right? And how cool it is that she gets to experience that. Or maybe you could tell her about how it felt growing up in that city that she's now in, right? And what was your life like growing up there, and how it influenced who you are as a person. Okay, maybe tell her about, would you, if you could go all back to your childhood, would you continue to grow up there? And where would you like to grow up instead? Where would you like to move to for the very first time, and why that is, right? We get attached to the why, not the what. So these are all very amazing topics to explore, and you could really start any of these stories, right? So many stories come from pretty much any statement or comment that's ever made in a conversation. All you really got to do is you got to think about what the story is, and you got to start sharing based on the topic that's related and just start spitting it out, okay? In the same story format that I gave you. And really, don't worry if it's hard at first. Trust me, you will get better at this with practice like you will with anything else. And also don't worry if your stories seem to be repetitive, right? Just if they seem repetitive, you tell the stories that matter to you. If it no longer matters to you, don't tell it. But don't feel bad about telling every girl the same story, because just because the girl changed doesn't mean that you changed, okay? Your stories stay the same. Now, lastly, if it's at all possible, you want to make sure to tell stories that are going to communicate attractive qualities, okay? So that you're trustworthy, that you have really high standards in who you date or who you surround yourself with, that you're very intelligent, okay? That maybe that you're adventurous and that you like to try new things even if you don't know if you're gonna like it, okay? Maybe that you're a really strong leader or that you care about your loved ones. These are all very strong qualities to have that make you way more attractive and will draw her to you as a person, okay? So for example, in my story about how I grew up and moved to Manhattan and I didn't start out that way, that communicates that I'm smart. It communicates that I'm a really hard worker, that I can take care of myself and make my own dreams come true, that I'm probably surrounded by really high quality people throughout my day, and that I'm really capable of achieving way, way, way more than that, right? For instance, if I've done that by the time I'm 25, what else am I capable of, okay? So these are really, really good qualities that you want to try to convert into a story and then tell them, again, with the format that I told you, that I explained to you, where there's a setting, a conflict, a resolution, and you want to use them to help her hook onto you and your character, okay? So I really hope that makes sense. If you could get this right, you are going to see an enormous amount of your dates coming through, of them coming back for more dates, right? And just getting sucked into your life. And when you share them, believe me, when you start leading her toward your home, she is not gonna have any problem, because she's like, this is the guy I've been looking for. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I'll see you in the next video.